So this month, on the Monday night, well, let's see, not this month, but for the next month, let's say, on the Monday night group, there'll be different teachers coming in and sharing their experience with meditation and the Dharma on different topics. And so just want to encourage everyone to still attend or to still tune in. Noah, it's not so much about the teacher as much as the teachings. And we all know Noah's great, and we love to hear him talk. And it's nice to really also encourage new teachers and other teachers to come and share their voice. So that's what we're going to be doing the next week while Noah's out of the country. He's going to be going on retreat in Thailand, a place I lived for a while and have been for many years. And and visiting one of our teachers, Ajahn Amaro. I guess he's Lungpor, which means like grandpa. Lungpor Amaro at this point. All right, so we're going to sit for a period of time. And so there are a couple people who are new to the group. People new to meditation, just raise your hand. A little bit, okay. All right, well, I'm going to give some instruction. We'll be sitting for about 30 minutes. And we'll just kind of see what happens, yeah? So one of the main things just to kind of think about is as far as posture, positioning, to allow the back to be upright but not rigid. It's helpful to have your feet flat on the floor. See if you're sitting on a cushion. Finding a way that's going to work for you, where you can both sustain some energy and at the same time be relaxed. So it's this balance, right? This middle way between we don't want to be too rigid. We're not statues, and yet we don't want to be so relaxed that we're going to just easily fall asleep, right? So finding that balance. And just settling in. Opening to the comings and goings of sound. Sounds outside the room. Sounds inside the room. So the invitation is to allow the sensations of sound or the comings and goings of sound to just be in the background of your attention. And then in some way allowing the attention to inhabit the body. This sitting, breathing body. The instructions from the Buddha were simple. While you're sitting, know that you're sitting. While breathing, know that you're breathing. So the invitation is to rest the attention here. Now, this present time experience of breath, body awareness. Sometimes it's useful to aim the attention towards the tip of the nose. Feeling the sensations of the breath at the nostril. Or perhaps the rise and fall of the belly. Whatever works for you. If you have a practice, if you have a way in which you meditate, just finding that space or that place to connect. Here. Now. Of course, the mind will wander off. It's not a problem. It's just what minds do. Think, plan, remember. Just acknowledging where the attention has gone. Perhaps using a simple label or note of future or past. And then aim the attention back. With a sense of friendliness or kindness with the mind. If you find that the mind is particularly agitated or restless, I'd like to just give a simple instruction. Can be used as a few sentences. Breathing in, I calm the mind. Breathing out, relax the body. Or simply on the in-breath saying, calm. And on the out-breath, silently saying, relax. Breathing in, I calm the mind. Breathing out, relax the body. Of course, recognizing whenever the attention wanders off, and with a sense of friendliness or kindness with the mind, aiming the attention back. Tip of the nose, rise and fall of the belly. Calm. Relax. again and again, recognizing whenever the attention has wandered off. And with that sense of friendliness or kindness with the mind, aiming the attention back. It's present time experience, breath, body, here. Breathing in, calming the mind. Breathing out, relaxing the body. Calm. Relax. So, So I'm going to, I just was thinking about this, and this is the way I kind of generally run a group, even if we're live streaming or not, but open up for any kind of questions in regards to meditation, particularly maybe the instructions or the way in which the instructions are given. And what I'd like to ask is that you be very concise in your question, particularly because I'll need to repeat it to those at home so that they're not just hearing muffled sounds and then me responding. So if there's any, I just want to open up before we move into the topic of discussion for the evening. Any questions just about the instructions or the meditation practice? Okay, I got the big okay. All right. Perhaps at the end there'll be some. You do? Okay, great.
So, I certainly listen to Buddhism. I can't keep up with it, but I think it's one of the 5 hindrances, like sloth and torpor.
Is that the question?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the question is about the hindrances, and is sloth and torpor a hindrance? And yes, absolutely. One of the ways that I translate sloth and torpor is like sleepiness or sluggishness of mind, because they're actually fairly different in the way that I've experienced them. Sleepiness is this kind of, sometimes it feels like a heaviness in the body, and there's this kind of like a lull to sleep, which is pretty common in meditation. And then there's this sluggishness of mind where it just feels foggy, where maybe there's energy in the body, but it feels foggy and like kind of hard to concentrate. Like I don't know, I kind of think about like trying to get through a really thick fog, or sometimes they say like trudging through like mud, like muddy water or something like that. So yeah, absolutely. It's just one of, 5 things that we're going to experience. And, I'll actually maybe get a little bit more into that later, but yeah, I mean, and there's several ways of just kind of working with that. Is that something that happened?
Yeah, it's. I mean, I can't remember the last time that happened. Usually, it's the opposite. But I haven't been sleeping well. And I remember you mentioning it. I think it was on a Wednesday night, talking about doing standing meditation,
right?
Which I've never tried. So maybe I would be interested in, how to do that.
Yeah.
Effectively and without, causing pain in the body.
Mm-hmm. So the question is, kind of how could you work with sloth and torpor, or sleepiness and sluggishness of mind? Yeah, there's a few suggestions. One is to allow the eyes to be open, right? So if you're feeling really sleepy, allowing the eyes to be open, but not necessarily engaging in the busyness of life, but still staying within the meditative experience. The other is to splash cold water on your face before you meditate. There's another, which is to kind of like imagine kind of brightness. It's like a visualization of imagining kind of energy, like this word virya, or energy that comes from meditation. And then the third can be, particularly if you're like super like sleepy and you find yourself kind of nodding. Sometimes it's also just like acceptance of, sometimes we're going to be a little sleepy, and that's it's okay. Right. But a way to work with that is to just mindfully come to standing, or if you know that you're going to be sleepy. I had a colleague of mine who actually hurt his hip, his like a tailbone and kind of hip, and he couldn't sit for a period of time, like a year. He couldn't sit in long-term meditation, and so he would just stand, and he would stand for 30, 45 minutes. And it's totally fine to do that, or to just, come to standing, So even right now, you can just totally stand. if that's what you want to, like if you're, feeling tense or if you want to stretch. Yeah. So just some ways to work with sloth and torpor. All right, so I'm going to kind of dive in. So the idea of, so I had a group for years in Northern California, and we called the group Dharma Punks, and that's always been something since the very beginning of this movement I felt connected to, from a punk rock kind of ethic and ethos to this idea of like, what is the Dharma but truth and truth in nature, and some the links between that. But as I began to kind of study, I took an anthropology class, anthropology of religion, and I wrote a paper called "The Buddha Was Punk Rock." My professor totally loved it, and I got like an A+. So I was like super stoked. And this was like in community college, like years and years ago. And anyway, that kind of started this path of kind of wanting to look at who is this person that we have been following the teachings of or the practices of for, thousands of years. And, just to kind of preface by saying I meditated for about 5 years without knowing anything about Buddhism. I'm a very kind of bottom-up experiential learner. I'm an experiential kind of person that's just kind of, I want to physically experience something more than intellectually understand it. And that's just how I've been. And I actually believe that there's kind of two roads, that there is the road of like practicing and gaining insight experientially. And then there's the road of intellectually understanding something, and both lead to the same place, which is gaining the combination of the both, or the middle path. And so for me, it was much more experiential. I had come from a martial arts background. I'm just kind of physicality is important to me. Anyway, so not that intellectualizing and understanding something from the top down isn't important, but it just wasn't the way that I found meditation. So I had meditated for about 5 years, and then a series of things happened. But my point was that I had changed the name of my group to Rebel Dharma. And I love that word. I love that phrase. And so that's kind of where I started to really look at, okay, let's look at the rebellious nature, because this is super rebellious, right? This is a radical, rebellious movement. Right? The idea, and this is, why this center is called Against the Stream, and the Buddha called this practice going against the stream, right? Rebelling against the kind of go with the flow attitude that has been so perpetuated in our culture and across the world, really, and throughout time, right? So anyway, I began to kind of study about 5 years in, and it kind of started, I guess I'm going to kind of back up. So I didn't leave the country until I was about 23. And my friend convinced me he had left the country and survived and made it back. And I was like, oh, okay. I guess it's not all just, bombs and terrorists out there. So maybe I'll go check it out, because that's kind of the conditioning that we have, is like, don't leave. This is the safe place. When in reality, this is the most dangerous place in the world, right? Just random acts of violence on Lincoln Boulevard. You know what I mean? Like, quite literally. Like, there was a shooting just the other day at an intersection down the street. So I went to Indonesia with the idea of when I was 12 years old. Okay, I looked at a map in my 7th grade class, and I pointed to Bali, and I thought, I'm going to go to Bali someday. And that was, my hope and dream as a 12-year-old. So my friend was going to travel through Indonesia, and I was terrified, but I was like, all right, let's do it. So we're traveling through Indonesia, started at Jakarta and kind of took a month and a half and worked our way all the way down. We ended up in this place called Yogyakarta, which is in the center of Java, the island of Java, which is, like 90% Muslim. Totally shook my perception of what Muslim means and is, which was awesome. Traveling through that part of the country. So we found out about, there's these ruins and this and that. And I ended up going to this place called Borobudur. And Borobudur is one of the largest Buddhist temples outside of India. So I didn't know much about Buddhism, and I just, and I was fascinated that here's this, 1,000, maybe 1,500-year-old temple that is humongous, right? And it looks like kind of Mayan temples or Aztec temples in the way that it's kind of built. And I just started kind of circumambulating, not even knowing what circumambulation is, around the temple all the way to the top, right? And has anyone been there to Borobudur? Yeah. So, there's these reliefs. And over the centuries, there's been earthquakes, and it's just an amazing experience. But I didn't really know much about Buddhism, but I was fascinated by the reliefs and the carvings. And what I'd come to find out is that, the whole temple, some of it was covered, but the whole temple represents the 400, the way the story goes, the 400 previous lives of the Buddha prior to being born as Siddhartha Gautama, the Shakyamuni Buddha, right, who is the historical Buddha. So I had this experience, and it was a pretty profound experience when at some point, I kind of stopped and just kind of was meditating, just kind of fell into a meditation. And I just wanted to know more about this person. And I left there. I guess I would say that's when I became a Buddhist. Like I left there just really curious. First of all, 1,500 years after this man lived and died, then in a totally different country where Buddhism was born, lived, and died. Buddhism is no longer in Indonesia. There's pockets within Bali, but very, very little. So anyway, I was fascinated, right? And I came back and I was fired up. And I started to kind of sign up for classes, and I took a non-Western philosophy class, and I took a anthropology of religion class, and I started to kind of, be just inquiring, who is this person? I'd experienced this practice. I'd experienced some of the benefits of the practice, but I didn't really know much about what was going on. And I was like, all right, if I'm going to be a Buddhist, then I should probably know something about this, right? And then I started to just get super turned on and kind of geeked out because I was really fascinated with, all right, so who's this person, right? This Shakyamuni Buddha. And then that there's all these different kinds of Buddhism, and then it's like those little Russian dolls. You ever seen a Russian doll where you take one, and then you take two, and then there's three, and then there's five, and then there's six, and they're getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And that's really the way all of Buddhism is. And it's what I began to find out when I started to kind of understand about the Buddha and the different aspects of the Buddha and what he held. One of the most important books that I read, I think, that kind of got me going on this kind of rebellious nature of the Buddha was a book called Buddhism: A Concise Introduction by Novak and Smith, and it's written by a perspective of a Mahayana and a Theravadan Buddhist. So, long story short, to say, I got kind of fired up about it, and later on I started a group, and I was like, I'm going to call my group Rebel Dharma because this is what I found. So I'm going to kind of talk a little bit more about the specifics of what I kind of found in my inquiry over the years. And it's still kind of, I'm still unpacking little Russian dolls of gems of how radical and different this practice is. So shifting to the notes. So, Shakyamuni, can best be described as a humanist and a seeker of truth. As a young person, he had a real keen sense of justice. he often opposed strict class systems, especially, the elite class of Brahmins who, had positioned themselves in these kind of high authority positions, right? So at the time, basically, what did Buddhism, or how was Buddhism born? Buddhism was born out of a rebellion against the status quo, against the Hindu classist system of the time in India, where basically the Siddhartha Gautama, who was a basically warrior caste. So he was the son of a king. Now, when we say king, king at that time, there was many kings, right, in regions and areas. And so Shakyamuni was a tribe, and that tribe had an area, had a space, had a place kind of between northern India and what we call Nepal now. And he was warrior caste. When Siddhartha Gautama, there's all this stuff about like how he was born, and there's like folklore about, he was born out of, the side of his mother, and then, elephants came, and, clouds parted, and there's some, mythology and cosmology attached to it, which, I think has its place. But, the Buddha himself rejected all of that kind of, all cosmology. He didn't really like mythology. He didn't really want to get lost in the kind of theoretical conversations. And actually, throughout the whole 45 years of his teaching after enlightenment, when he was asked all kinds of, kind of crazy questions, right? Like, what happens when we die? And, is there other worlds? And is there a multiverse? And, do we have a soul? And is the soul connected to the body? And is there a God? And all of these different things that we want to know, right? Most of us are called to a spiritual practice. Why? Because we want to know. And then the Buddha very often would just stay silent during those questions, not respond. And when he would respond, he would usually respond with something like, I teach one thing and one thing only, and that's that there is suffering and that there's an end to suffering. So he wasn't really concerned with, all these kind of theoretical, mythological kind of conversations. And, at some point there's some cosmology that comes into play. But largely, the Buddha was rebelling against this kind of Hindu system. And that the other thing that happened is that, so the Brahmins, right, who were this kind of elite kind of, think of like Catholicism, okay? Think of Catholicism and how there's these kind of these, priests, and then there's, cardinals, and then all the way up to the Pope, right? So they kind of hold it down, and they only speak Latin, and it's very similar, right, in that sense. That the Brahmin class only, they still kept Sanskrit, even though the language had changed in northern India. And so it was like harder to access, that people had to pay money in order to have, rites and rituals given to them, or get in their mantra, or, different kinds of things performed. And it's still that way in many parts of India, actually. So the Buddha was like, yeah, this isn't the concern, right? So he rebelled against the Brahmin class. He opposed, the class system. The Buddha was said to be very sensitive and intellectual as a young person. And he often, as a boy, he questioned the Brahmins that were his kind of educators, his teachers. So he's kind of precocious. And he was always kind of questioning. And he was always kind of, prodding a little bit of like, is that true? And that was just one of the qualities that has come out in some of the documents and some of the kind of historical kind of data. So that he was regarded as belonging to a group of reformist thinkers. So, at the time of the Buddha, what you want to think about is that, the whole country, which is a ginormous country, and even bigger at the time, was mostly Hindu. And then there was some there was Jainism, and I don't want to get into all of it, but there was there's little factions of other belief systems, right? And there was lots of gurus walking around and lots of sadhus walking around and, people that were spiritual seekers, right? Which is one of the reasons why he even took the robes in the beginning, is that he saw this kind of, this different way. But so he rebelled against his class and position, and against, the thinking of the time. He was propelled in the questions of birth, death, sickness, old age, and suffering. These were the things that mattered to a young Siddhartha. You think about in his mid-20s, after having, I don't know how much you know about the story of the Buddha, but after having basically a life of luxury, right? He had, massive temples, and he had, a fixed marriage, but he was married. He had just had a son, but prior to that, he was actually trained as a warrior. He was actually super physical, like he would fight with his cousins and all. And this comes up later, actually, after he becomes a Buddha and kind of renounces violence, where his cousins are still kind of out to get him for years later, and envious and jealous, and because they're also Brahmin class. But he was apparently pretty tough and kind of a badass, which is that was fun for me to know. And then made a different choice, right? Seeing that doesn't actually get you any closer to happiness or any closer to peace or ease. So he was propelled with these questions of birth, death, sickness, old age, and suffering. At the time of the Buddha, intermingling was taboo, especially within the caste system, right? Especially around accepting food. So just the fact of taking on the spiritual seeker role, from a line of kings, was an act of rebellion, where the Buddha was like, you know what, that's bullshit. It doesn't matter. And I'm going to, renounce all of my wealth and whatnot and, take to the streets and seek truth. It kind of changes our whole, because, there's a caste system here. We call it a class system, right? But this idea of homelessness as being the lowest place. And, at the time in India, and, even now, there's actually some urban retreats, and I haven't been on one, but I've been homeless actually. And it's rough, but it's also very enlightening. Also, it has its own spiritual practice. But just this idea, there's urban retreats where, people can choose to be homeless for a period of time, and be on retreat in that way. I don't know that much more about it, other than it seems like an interesting and kind of a radical thing to do. So anyway, he actually, never really settled on, accepting other teachers fully on their own, and always looked at whether, this was true for him and what could still be done to end his own suffering and the suffering of in this life. So he was constantly, even though he had, he sat with, good, super concentration gurus and, the best, yogi, meditators and pranayama breath, and went to, vinyasa flow all day long. And, he took on all of these different experiences that were happening, learning from different spiritual teachers, and very often surpassing them. And still, and then being offered actually wealth, right? I mean, think about, this guy who was seeking truth and had come to a place where he had surpassed his teacher. And then the teacher was like, yeah, you can come and, we can just kind of sit back and, have tons of students and make tons of money and, do this thing. And the Buddha to be was like, no, that's not actually helping me to be at ease or at peace. And that's not actually helping propel this, humanity towards freedom from the suffering. That's actually feeding right back in to greed, right? So the Buddha, after his enlightenment, he offered this teaching to everyone without exception. And that was radical in itself, right? To say, actually, you don't need to go into those churches. You don't need to go. You can wake up in this life. these different kinds of things, isn't actually, I mean, it might feel good, but it's not actually going to alleviate the suffering in your life. There was all kinds of, there's all kinds of stories too. Like so the Ganges is the holy river in India, and in certain, and I've been there, and in certain places in India, it's like 90% fecal matter, right? Like it's also a major sewage line, and there's lots of burning of dead bodies that then go into the river, and there's all kinds of, weird aspects of that. But the belief at the time, and still the belief today, is that if you bathe in the Ganges, that you're kind of free or washed away of your sins, right? And there's actually these certain places throughout India where there's these they're like baths where you go into and you're gonna cleanse yourself. And the Buddha totally rejected that, and he was like, if that was true, everybody that has ever done that would be free from suffering. But that's not the case, right? So that's where he kind of rebelled against this idea of these different certain rites and rituals, and kept pointing to, actually the understanding the mind and seeing where suffering comes from and how. So this is within the Four Noble Truths, understanding that there is suffering. First of all, stop not being in denial of it. And then that there is a cause to suffering. That this craving, this selfish, self-centered craving, and and this attachment to greed, hatred, and delusion, actually, is the cause, and that there is a cessation. It is possible because he had freed himself from suffering. So there's this way in which it's possible to free ourselves from suffering. And then the fourth noble truth is that then there's a path, or some people call it a prescription, right? A treatment to freeing ourselves from suffering. So anyway, all were welcome, right? He didn't leave anyone out. And that, basically he taught that acts of generosity and loving kindness as the antidote to greed or hatred. And then he also taught, by practicing this present time awareness, what we practice here, will deliver one out of delusion and into the light of the dharmas. So what are the dharmas? So the dharmas are the truth that is revealed once we're able to, some would say, kind of drop down below the busyness of the kind of getting caught in greed, hatred, and delusion, right? Which is, just so. How has this happened here today, right? How do we get swept away? We're about to get swept away again. We can't even stop it with the holidays, right? This kind of, now, luckily, I mean, there's a generosity holiday, right? But it's also, there's so much more tied into it, right? And I'll maybe talk about that, specifically on another day. But this idea of kind of like, how much are we feeding into this perpetuation of greed and separation and disconnection, right? So by understanding and seeing the light of the dharmas is to say that to see how much we're actually connected and how much it's a common experience that we're suffering. So all are welcome. Women, the poor, beggars, crazy people or people with mental illness, right? Rich, gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender. It doesn't matter. It's never mattered. And only like in the very beginning, when the Buddha, his stepmother and his ex-wife came to him as the first two women to become nuns. And, the Buddha was like, at first he was just kind of like, we don't have a Sangha. We only have a Sangha that's for men. And they were like really insistent. He was like, all right, and he started, and that started the line, right? Started the line of female monastics, which is awesome. And at some point that line, was broken by patriarchy. And then now in the last, I'd say several years, maybe 10 years or so, has been reinvigorated, which is pretty awesome. So yeah, all were welcome. Kids, young people. The Buddha brought his son, Rahula, who was 7.5 years old, into the Sangha, and had him ordained, or he chose to ordain, and be a disciple of his father. After, right, years and years of him not being there. He was kind of I hate to say it, but he was kind of a deadbeat dad. Like, he took off and hit the streets and went to go seek enlightenment and do his own thing, but he came back and he reconnected, and he gave, in some of the teachings it talks about, he gave the best gift to give, which is the path to the truth, or to end suffering. So all one needed to do was have a desire to wake up, right? To wake up and to practice vipassana, or insight, to practice the Dharma. So the Buddha rebelled against his own mind, right? His own conditioning, his thoughts, body, mental formations, and even sat in rebellion against the attack on Mara, which is also called the hindrances, right? This is what we were kind of talking about earlier. And there's 5 hindrances, and they're also thought of as kind of mental affliction. Sometimes they're talked about, or sometimes they're talking about kalesas, which are the torments of mind. The word kalesa means torments of mind, which I think that's a really great way of talking about mental health. And some of the ways in which we struggle psychologically is these torments of mind that come in waves, right, or storms. And the Buddha sat in rebellion against his own mind and his own tendencies, just like he asks us to do, right? Where was I get kind of excited about this. So his defiant nature and the power to question was a quality that I believe led to his departure into homelessness in the first place, and his awakening. So his rebellion against teachings of the Brahmin rituals and this hierarchical, patriarchal, classist system that was at the time in India, where actually, so I don't know if you know this or not, but in Hinduism, and definitely at that time, and maybe it's changed some, but not much, women weren't even allowed in the temples, right? They had to stay outside. They could provide food, but they weren't allowed to receive teachings. They weren't allowed to be lifted up. They weren't allowed to free themselves from suffering. And so the Buddha was like, that's bullshit. And actually being born as whatever gender you're born, or whatever your gender actually you choose to be, doesn't actually matter. You can still free yourself from suffering. And so that was another aspect of where the Buddha was just like super radical, rebellious, 2,560 years ago. That's pretty radical. And at a, in a place that still has that, where, women are still stoned for things that men get away with all the time. It's just horrible. Okay. So one of my favorite teachings, and when I really kind of started to understand that the unpacking of Buddhism, one of my favorite teachings is known as the Kalama Suta. And the Kalama Suta is basically, so it's about this people, and it's kind of their recollection of what happened. Okay, so let me just explain to you a little bit about the Kalama Suta or the Kalama people before I read the sutta. So the Kalama people lived along the Ganges, and at that time, civilizations lived close to water so that they could farm and they could have fresh water and whatnot, right? And it's still the case today, although we have some other ways of getting water places, right? Because what is this but a desert, right? Especially over there. Here, it's okay. Over there, it's a desert. Yet they grow almonds and stuff. But so the Kalama people were this village, and they lived along this major trade road, right? And so every month Now, we can relate to this. Every month, a new sage, guru, spiritual teacher would come through their village and be like, check it out. This is the way to awaken. This is the way to free yourself from suffering. This is the only way, this path, right? You know, you think about like the old Western days, and they would be like, you know, coming into town would be like the soothsayer with the snake oil and the, different, kind of elixirs, right? Which were like opium and booze, pretty much. Some cocaine, right? This is the way. This is the elixir. All those other ones are fake. This is the true shit, right? This is the raw dope, right? So that's basically what was happening. And so, then the Kalama people wanting to free themselves from suffering, wanting to live a life of happiness and joy and all the things promised, they would start doing this practice. And then a month later, someone else would come in, some other guru would come through and be like, oh, that concentration practice is wrong. And what you really need to do is you need to repeat this mantra, day and night, standing on one foot. And if you do that, then you will awaken, right? And not if you do these other things. And so here comes the Buddha, right? Traveling through, not long actually after his, so he hadn't had a big name yet. He wasn't, like His Holiness the Dalai Lama, where everyone knows who His Holiness the Dalai Lama is, right? Like, I don't know if you guys remember, but like in the 80s, no one really knew who His Holiness the Dalai Lama was, except for maybe some Tibetans and, a couple other people, right? So it was about that time, so he hadn't had a following, there was no Instagram page for, the Buddha and whatnot, right? So he goes traveling in and he has his Sangha with him, his band of monks. And he actually was camped outside of the village, and some of the villagers came and they were like, oh great, here's another soothsayer, right? Another sage, coming to, preach to us. But the difference is that the Buddha actually didn't, they went on alms rounds and then went back out, and he wasn't like proselytizing, which is one of the aspects of Buddhism, is that people come to the practice. We're not kind of out there beating the drum, and we do a little bit of that nowadays because, marketing's useful. But so what happened is that some of the villagers came to the Buddha and they were like, okay, look, like every month this new person comes through, and what is it? Like what are you selling? How do we know the difference of what is, the true practice? And basically the Buddha had this to say. He said to the Kalama people, in short, do not believe something because you've heard it before, because it's an old tradition, because it is written in religious or other books. Superficially, it seems true. Logically or philosophically, it seems true. Teachers or elders say it's true, even famous ones. The Buddha told the Kalama people, only believe something that you yourself have experienced the happiness of a practice, or that leads to the relief of suffering in your life and in the life of others. So look, trust your own experience and find freedom through clear seeing of the Dharma, through your own direct experience, right? In other words, don't believe what other people are saying. See what's true for you, but you have to practice to do that, right? In other words, this is one of the reasons why I love this and why I consider myself a Buddhist, because what the Buddha is saying at this particular time and throughout his history of teaching is, don't have blind faith. Don't just believe something because it's said, but have verifiable faith. Develop the confidence based on your own experience of a practice, right? And the Buddha goes on to say this: even if I tell you something that doesn't fit for you, right? So the Buddha gave many different prescriptions, many different practices, and it didn't fit for everyone. Some people didn't understand the Four Noble Truths. So he would give a concentration practice, or he would give a loving kindness practice. It's all within the Four Noble Truths, but it had to have different translations based on who he was teaching to. And he later told his monks, as he sent them out in all directions, he said, teach in the vernacular of the people, right? Which is why we like to cuss here, because that's the vernacular of my people. And also just speaking, straight, not trying to kind of mix words or be, I don't know. Anyway, I don't want to put other people down. But anyway, the Buddha said to the Kalama people, so find this practice that's true for you. Even if I tell you something that doesn't fit for you, discard it. But keep searching, keep looking, just like he did. So, and he's like, this is how I woke up, and you can wake up too, right? But stay the path. Look within. Be still. Free from fear and attachment. Know the sweet joy of living in the way. And oftentimes, Buddhism, it's called the path, or it's called the way, because it takes effort. It's not necessarily a doctrine. Now, that's happened, unfortunately, because as soon as the Buddha died, matter of fact, there was, the Buddha, outlawed any kind of statues of him. And even in the beginning, right, when people would come and they would kneel to want to join the Sangha, it was never take homage in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. It was the Dharma and the Sangha. Now, people, had reverence for the Buddha, but the Buddha himself was what he didn't want that. He was like, it's not about me, which is great. And I think it's one of the reasons why this wheel of the Dharma is still here today, because and why there's many different faces of the Buddha, because, different teachers went to different countries, different monks traveled in all different directions, and they thought that was the Buddha. Now, that was very well could have been an enlightened, an arahant, a student of the Buddha, and that taught Buddhism. But it's one of the reasons why there's translation. It's also, artistic, and, over thousands of years, people start to, make things look different. Look more like them. Like, I don't know, maybe there's going to be like a, kind of an American Buddha image at some point. There probably already is, I think I've seen one on the what's that? Oh, our Mohawk Buddha? Yeah, our Mohawk Buddha. Right? This is the American Buddha. Right? This is the punk rock Buddha for sure. Yeah. Anyway, that's kind of all I got for this, but I was going to think about today. I was thinking about some other rebels. And, at the same time of the Buddha, about 500 BC, Socrates was over in Greece, and he was, raising hell and saying, don't believe everything you think, and Jesus Christ, 500 years later, also a rebel, total rebel. And look what's happened, there's this kind of way in which translation sometimes gets lost over the years. I was thinking about Einstein. Einstein was this total rebel, rebelled against, everything that his country, his time, rebelled against what we perceive. Right? Gandhi, another rebel. Martin Luther King, another rebel. And the list goes on, right? And there's no women in that list, and that's because I'm a guy. I didn't know. They're absolutely rebels in feminine history, feminism. Bell Hooks there's a rebel. Maya Angelou, rebel. Angela Davis, rebel. It's just off the top of my head. So we're going to end. And we just end by actually gathering up all the goodness of this practice. You can fold your hands or not fold your hands. It doesn't really matter. And dedicating the work that we do here and the goodness that we gain from this practice. And that we don't only do this practice for ourselves, but we do this practice for all beings. So may any goodness be dedicated to the freedom from suffering for all beings everywhere. Thank you for your time and attention.